Hey everyone, what up? Mad Kaiser here, and we return back to Fairy Tail. Now when it comes to anime games, there's roughly multiple sides of the spectrum, especially when it comes to different genres, whether it's things like fighting games, warriors games, or what the hell Death Note is here. However, among that, there's also another genre that anime games also fall into, and that being JRPGs, with that subgenre being a thing since the late 80s. And even famed Japanese RPG developers have made tons of RPGs based on the license of particular anime, with things like CyberConnect 2 and Bandai doing Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, to Square Enix with Infinity Strash, Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai, as well as even Sega and RGG Studio doing Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. And once again Bandai Namco also even making that Reincarnated as a Slime game, as well as a whole slew of Sword Art Online games. And hell, even Konami's got to dabble with it too, with the recent Eden Zero game. However, there's also been another Japanese company that's dabbled with anime games, nearly as much as say Bandai Namco even. And that would have to be of course Koei Tecmo, with them mostly doing anime warriors games, as well as even other RPGs, and even action games. But it's things like your Attack on Titan games, or even Fate Samurai Remnant. However, there is one major play here that I haven't mentioned just yet, and actually that's two games, that being based on the Fairy Tail IP themselves, that being both Fairy Tail and Fairy Tail 2. And given that I recently got into the series last year, I decided to take a look at these, and see these games if they are fired up as they are, as some of the more bare anime games we even had, or if they're nothing but just lazy cash grabs that make you feel a bit more motion sick, to say the least. But before we begin, if you like what you're seeing here, then by all means, like the video, click the subscribe button if you're new, and hit the notification icon if you want more RPG content and reviews from yours truly. With that said, let's get back to the video, and without further ado, let's get along with this double review. Kicking off, we start with Fairy Tail, released for the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and PC via Steam on July 31st, 2020. Now this game was developed by Gust, the same studio that does the Atelier series, and with them recently striking gold with Atelier Ryza. And this one in particular takes aspects of the Atelier series, and puts the shoes of that to the Fairy Tail crew, with reliving some of the best aspects as well as the best arcs in video game format. Now, the general consensus for this game is a bit of a mixed bag, with it getting a mid-60s to 70s on Metacritic. But with all that said, let's do some quests, participate in the tournament, and get ourselves fired up as we head straight into—
Hold it right there!
What the? Who the hell are you?
I am Spectre799, and I hear you were talking about Fairy Tail. And now I'm asking, how you didn't invite me in your previous video talking about it sooner?
Okay, but how the hell did you get it in?
By, of course, magic, and more so, my powers just give me the ability to do so.
Ah, I see. I should really find a way to secure from anyone crashing into my videos. You know, it wasn't the first time that happened, but anyway, since you came here anyway, and I can't find a way to get you off, wanna team up and talk about Fairy Tail?
I mean, yeah, that's what I came here for.
So, Spectre799, will you do the honors?
Well, with that said, let's do some quests, participate in the tournament, and get ourselves fired up as we head straight into Fairy Tail.
Now the story for Fairy Tail is— oh boy, it's something. So it starts at Temuru Island, the sacred ground for the guild, where Natsu and the gang defeat Hades, who's the leader of the Dark Guild Grimoire Heart, and once former master of Fairy Tail. However, after their victory, they get attacked by a powerful dragon named Acronologia, and just barely survive, and when they arrive back at their home Magnolia, they see that their guild has not only plummeted, but also lost its reputation for a very, very long time. And so, with that, the gang set out to restore the Fairy Tail Guild into its former glory, with them taking lots of jobs, participating in a tournament, and stopping evil threats that will not only doom not only the future, but also the world itself. And that's the story, and good lord, it's something, alright?
Now, for full clarity for you folks at home, this whole structure of the game is a weird amalgamation of the anime's ending of Season 1, the bulk and majority of Season 2, and a teeny snippet of Season 3, with the more important arcs being adapted. We start at the end of the Tenro Island arc, and then proceed to the Grand Magic Games arc, one of my personal favorites, and then the Tartaros arc. Now, as in for the filler arcs, like say Key to the Starry Sky or the Eclipse one, well, they're not here exactly. Go figure, as they don't really add much to the story, and as for the Sun Village arc and the Avatar arc, well, they kind of exist more so as cliff notes.
And while it does adapt moments from the arcs decently, there are just instances where the games will deviate, because of not only gameplay reasons, but also, not everyone here gets a full-on model. And another major issue is that in the prospect of this game is that it takes roughly at the middle to near end of the series, which I imagine, especially for newcomers, that'll be tough to follow and understand. Now sure, the game does do a decent job of providing some context for the characters' events, but I really feel like if you haven't read the manga or even watched the anime, all of the more prior and even important and emotional moments displayed here won't truly impact you. However, the characters are still great as they were in the anime and manga, and while it does suck that there's no English dub, the Japanese voices are still strong, since they are the same from the anime themselves. That said, however, Natsu screaming, especially when it comes to his attack names during battle, does drive me a little bit crazy, not gonna lie. I do think it would have been a lot better if Fairy Tail 1 adapted the first set of arcs, like say Macau, Daybreak, and Eisenwald would have been not only brief but fairly straightforward, while the more center major arcs like say Sub-Zero Lion, Phantom Lord, Tower of Heaven, Arashin 6, Edilus, and the entirety of Timber Island would have been a much major focus. But alas, it was not meant to be.
Now we get onto the graphics, and a lot of what we discuss is going to be rough.
Yeah. Anyway, for the positives, Gust really did a main job with the main character models for the gang, with everyone looking on par, especially when it comes to Hiromashima's general design to Fairy Tail, and each of them even carried their very funny anime expressions to a T.
I mean, Urza is the only one that's just perfect in every way, so it's not a surprise to anybody.
That she is, my friend, and the other main cast do have some really solid and good models, as well as these cute hand-drawn PNGs. However, as mentioned, not everyone gets a model.
See, some characters, most notably Merity, Capricorn, Scorpio, Lucy's frickin' landlord for example, don't necessarily have models, but have actual dialogue and talk to the cast. It's just that you don't see them, and it's honestly quite jarring.
But that's not as bad as say the NPCs, where literally a lot of them are straight up copy-pasted throughout the towns, and it's really noticeable and uncanny. It almost feels like we're in a simulation, than rather, immersing in Fairy Tail's world. Yikes!
Not only that, but the textures are kinda rough. And yes, I know this game didn't have much of a budget, as the devs who made it, being Gust, aren't known for big budget games. I mean, they did start improving with their visuals with Atelier Ryza. So, handling a much bigger property for a development studio that's known for AA JRPGs wasn't exactly going to be one big marvel among also developing it for PS4 and Switch. That being said, some of the funny moments that they do include, like say the zoom-ins, do give a bit of hilarity.
Yeah, especially when it comes to Urza kicking happy, though at least the rendered cutscenes do look nice. And in terms of performance, especially running on PS5 by the PlayStation 4 via backwards compatibility, it even does run at a nice 60 FPS, especially when it comes to battle, and the animations, of course during combat, look sick as hell. Get on to the gameplay. So Fairy Tail is a turn-based game, with having a max of 5 party members in your crew, and your enemies are set on this grid-based area.
Each party member have a standard attack, and magic, which costs MP, as you would in a JRPG, though each ability have different ranges, effects, and indicate which ones enemies are weak to or resistant to. As well as, unlike other games, losing MP is as dangerous as losing HP, as if you lose MP entirely, your character is knocked out, which is honestly how it was depicted in the show, so that's pretty accurate with how many characters spend so much ether nano just to do that.
Each of the abilities shows you a visual of the area and position to attack, which provides a bit of strategy in the mix. And even some effects even prompting includes things like counter stands, pushing an enemy back a row, and even have a big circle on the right called the fade gauge, which grows after each attacks.
Once unleashing this fairy gauge, you can perform a long string of attacks until you're prompted with a finisher, with the option of using higher magic or lower magic attacks at the cost of MP. Furthermore, you also have an awakened state, this gauge underneath the portraits, right here. And once you fill that and activate it, which it increases your physical and magic attack for up to 3 turns. And you even have the ability to do so during your opponent's turn. Some characters like, say, Natsu, Gajiel, and Wendy even can go into Dragon Force or Elemental forms just like they do in the show.
And you have a magic chain, which activates, where several characters are either awakened or even change modes. And, just like the show, you can even perform a unison raid, where both characters can perform a massive powerful blast. And you even have a mechanic here called overdamage, where it comes to play, where you can destroy objects during fights to progress through hidden areas if you deal the right amount of damage, and extreme magic, where various characters will even aid you to provide some support magic. Now, the gameplay for this is actually really good, but however, there is one big problem.
It's just that the game is just far too easy. Like, regular encounters and even certain boss fights don't really give much leeway to make you think and strategize. The only form of a boss fight that I could feel some sort of challenge is enemies healing themselves or managing your MP resources. It doesn't help too that during the Grand Magic games with individual fights, you'll get free auto heals and buffs from the crowd. And this sucks because it kind of just ruins a large majority of the tension. What made the anime so great, or at least this particular arc, was that it felt like a mad giant ultimate battle to the death where everybody was trading blows one-on-one. That's just not here. The 1v1s honestly might be the closest that we have to giving some sort of challenge, but even using your strongest magic or using counter magics and fairy gauge can just nuke enemies.
And it's a damn shame, as it just doesn't match to some of the best fights in the actual show, and can sometimes make for an overall boring experience at times. Now, whether or not this was made for casuals who just enjoy the anime or manga, and that explains why the game is so easy, it's really hard to say. And what's really sad, as the follow-up to this abandons the combat entirely. Some say maybe for the better, but as I know, many Fairy Tail fans would prefer an action style of gameplay to match for the combat. But, oh well. And as for the exploration, it's...
Yeah, and the exploration for this is pretty subpar. It's mostly a linear experience with some various iconic areas from the show, mostly being hallways with some slight openish areas here and there. Though, except for punching through objects and finding stuff is pretty neat too, so that's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's fun for what it is, but you can definitely tell from the constraints that feels only limited. And due to the copy and paste NPCs you do have on display, it feels a little bit immersion breaking.
However, one big upside, in my personal opinion to all this, is that the music is really, really good. With it sounding on par with Yasunari Takahashi's score from the anime, lots of comforting and fun melodies, while also having some really good Celtic rock during the fights. It's so hype.
Yeah, even the menu sounds like it came straight from the anime. Whoever Gust did the OST for this knew the damn assignment.
Play the soundtrack.
Now it's time to talk about the content. And this is where some people really dread about this game. And that is, Fairy Tail's bulk of content is all quest based, which you doing lots of these jobs, where it's things like kill monsters, collect items, all the generic fetch quest stuff you come to expect. And sadly, some of these are also mandatory when progressing through the game, which is what I think turns some people off, as it's very clear that this game was filled to the brim with padding.
There's also the building mechanic, where if you collect items, you can upgrade facilities like bookshops, item shops to improve the guild, as well as also gain new RPG perks. There's even the occasional character quests that you can have to unlock and help you upgrade your characters. A lot of them playing out a little bit similar to the anime and the manga, with them referencing certain events from prior arcs. There's also an epilogue/true ending once you beat the main story, and another part that kind of just fills me with dread.
Yep, and that's the DLC, where they offer bonus characters like Lizana, Elfman, and Levy into your party, on top of also adding new quests and an extra dungeon boss or two. When in reality, a lot of it just feels like it should have been in the base game itself. And well, sadly, it does not get better with the sequel. Hoo boy.
A standard run of this game can take about, say, 23 hours or less, give or take. But if you want to be a completionist, no, not that one. It will take you about 46 hours, 50 max, which honestly isn't too bad, but it's not a lot. It kind of just reminds me of how Expedition 33 ended, for me at least.
Well, how was this game, you may ask? Well, it's complicated. Now, I wouldn't say it's a bad game, but you can definitely tell that this felt very short in so many various ways.
As a whole, the game just doesn't really suck. It is just aggressively okay, and a decent way to see how Fairy Tail would play in an RPG like this. But you can tell from the budget and the time constraints, as well as just some serious questionable choices, that this isn't going to set the world on fire or anything. Wink wink, punch intended.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
If you're a fan of Fairy Tail, then maybe you get some enjoyment out of this. Just don't expect too much out of it, however, and especially on how it comes to depict certain moments come across the best arcs. And as for a newcomer, I wouldn't say it's entirely ideal, but you can definitely tell that this was made for fans only. The combat, music, and other cozy-ish aspects do at least salvage an average game. That being said, I'll give Fairy Tail just barely 3 happies out of 5.
Well, that was a lot of fun. However, I have to go now. Expedition 33 needs me. Peace out.
Well, that was awkward. Anyway, go check out his content. Bro makes some really amazing content on his channel. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta find a way to close that hole so that no one else barges in. We then come to Fairy Tail 2, released for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and PC on December 12, 2024. And this one serves as a direct sequel to the first one, and made some really bold changes here, especially when it comes to both the gameplay and structure, and also being developed by Gust, and this one centers more on adapting the final arc, as well as also having an original story in the end. Now, the consensus like this game, especially compared to the first, is also it's a mixed bag, with it also gaining a mid-60s to 70s on Metacritic. And then once again, special thanks to Koei Tecmo Europe for providing me a review code of this. With that said, let's get back to the review. The story of Fairy Tail 2 has both Natsu and all of Fairy Tail wage war to protect their land against the Alvarez Empire, led by Zeref and the Spriggan 12, while also having to encounter and deal with the dangerous King of Dragons, that being Agnologia. And that is the story. And now right off the bat, for context, this plot is an overall adaptation of the Alvarez arc, which is both the final arc of the manga and anime of the original series. And regardless on how you feel about it, especially for those who either read or watch it, whether you dislike it or like it, the story for this one, especially this game, for the most part, plays off beat by beat, albeit with some deviations here and there. Now, personally, I did like the Alvarez arc, so it being adapted here, especially in the game, with it reliving some of the more iconic moments, was a treat. Obviously, there are some obvious omissions here, like missing certain characters, as they obviously don't have models. So, it's a little bit weird. And some character development moments are behind these diary segments that are just often offbeat and very quiet. And obviously, if you did have the gripes about the arc itself, well, it's still present in this game as well. However, given that this game only focuses on one arc, the pacing and structure flows way better than the first game. Whereas mentioned in the other review alongside me and Spectre799, the first one was just a weird hodgepodge of various arcs just strapped in together with strings of cheese, and the pacing was just really shallow, as it was mostly just quest based till the plot actually happens. Here, however, Fairy Tail 2 is more narrative focused and doesn't entirely focus on quests that will pad out the runtime. The characters are still great as they are always, and the Japanese VAs do reprise their role, especially from the first game and the anime. I'm still a little bit disappointed that there's still no English dub, but for what it is, it's fine. But hey, at least Natsu's voice has toned down, especially due to the high-pitched screaming he did in Fairy Tail 1. Now we get on to the graphics, and it's a bit of a marked improvement. I mean, Fairy Tail 1 looked okay for the most part, with the best looking aspects being the character models. It's just everything else just felt cheap and very low budget, especially with certain characters that appeared in speech bubbles and portraits, but still have no actual models. Oh, and let's not forget the very obvious copy and pasted NPCs. However, the models in this one do give a bit of an upgrade here, and the color grading is much more richer, opposed to say the first game. But however, you can still tell that this is still a budget title, and done on the lower end of Gust, especially when you look at games like Atelier Yumiya, as well as even the Atelier Rising games and Atelier Sophie 2. As there are things like these amazing looking, though still static image stills, as well as aspects of cutscenes where during the gameplay, it will let you move the camera and it will just feel a bit static. Oh, and of course, some cutscenes where two characters will be talking in front of a still background that feels straight out of something you see in trailers, especially during the buying events of Cold Steel. Now, it's not bad per se, and it's still leaps and bounds more interesting than whatever the hell Infinity Stratch's cutscenes were, especially the ones that don't use the in-game graphics. That being said, the actual rendered cutscenes, that being the FMVs here, are the best ones here. Now as for performance, it's okay on PS5, managing to run 60 FPS just fine, especially during both gameplay and cutscenes. That is until, of course, however, you get to a later boss that shoots sand particles all over the battle, and it's really, really bad. But yeah, overall, the environments look nice, and it's a little bit better than the first, but still, it's not perfect. But hey, at the very least, there's no creepily copy-paste NPCs roaming around. Now we get on to the gameplay. So during the marketing of this game, people thought that this game would be a full-on action game, opposed to the first one being full-on turn-based, with taglines and messages saying from the PR that it would have fully real-time combat. However, that is further from the actual truth, as this game essentially has an action turn-based system, or ATB, and if you played any of the Rise sequels, or even things like say the classic Final Fantasy or Chrono Trigger, you'll get an idea, as you'll have a time gauge in the circle that recharges over time, and after you make your combo and wait until the gauge is restored, which will make your turn once again. Now you start with a normal 3-hit combo, and doing so grants you SP, which replaces the MP magic system, and each ability will cost a different amount of SP, and depending on how much SP you can culminate, you can perform a chain to use another ability during a combo. You also have a block to reduce damage, and when enemies attack you, you could get a quick signal to block their attacks to reduce on being staggered. You also have the fairy rank system. This bar of lines here that increase depending on the actions, like performing a combo. And when the rank is increased, your SP will also be increased and will gain benefits like using fairy magic, which are the support magic cards from other characters to provide very powerful assist moves, alongside buffs and debuffs, and where each of them will cost a certain rank gauge. And when it's used, it will have a recharge gauge, so you can't spam them willy-nilly. Now, while in combat you do control one party member, while the other two are AI controlled, you can still switch between them mid-battle, and have the even option to switch between places with the reserve party members, which really is a great option here, as each party member will have, just like the first game, their own strengths and weaknesses, among abilities that certain enemies are weak to, and it's a really nice way to think of who you can use. Enemies will also have this yellow bar here, which is their stagger bar, which can be depleted by using powerful moves and attacks that they are weak to, and if they are drained, you get prompted to do a link attack, where the nearest party member can do a follow-up attack, and that could essentially finish them or even do extra damage. And each will provide you either a buff or debuff, and shows which enemy is weak to or resistant to that party member. There are also the risk moves, where enemies and bosses can charge to do a powerful move, and have a symbol for you to destroy, with the right party member's attacks that match that same symbol. And if you use a powerful attack that can destroy that risk move, that enemy will also be stunned. You also have the option to pause a battle to use items and view enemy stats. And you also have a magic origin skill tree, which has 3 different sets of skill trees to unlock, from both strength, skill, and spirit. And each of them provides status buffs, as well as new skills to obtain, as well as enhanced skills. And you'll get these points by either leveling up, or killing enemies and also gain materials. And they also unlock sub-stories, though more centered on the latter case. Lakamar returns and adds your form of equipment, and each will have their own bonuses, and some of them can be customized with various materials to gain from either doing things, like killing enemies and nearby magic pools, or come across Lakamar statues. Among all of that, later down the line, you'll be able to jump from higher ledges, take down obstacles, and mow down enemies that are far weaker than you. When it comes to bosses, they're a lot more tougher to deal with, and instead of having one stagger bar, they usually have 3, and each time they're depleted, you can provide a link attack. But if the last one is entirely depleted, you can perform a unison raid, just like in the show and just like in the first game, where both 2 party members can provide a powerful devastating team-up attack. And just like with the first game, Awakening returns by the circle here on the top of your HP, and when it's full, you get to activate it, and it provides you extra buffs, including things like HP regen, attack and defense buff, and ending off with a powerful attack. And some characters will have even their own special forms, like Grey having Devil Slayer form, or Wendy even having Dragon Force. Now when it comes to exploration, it's a step up from Fairy Tail 1, where it's more open zone, opposed to being very linear, with some albeit neat collectibles and hope of enemies to fight. However, the world design, while it's still nice to look at, I wouldn't call it exactly engaging or captivating, that makes you really want to explore everything, except for, of course, for finding lookouts and finding campfires, as everything almost feels a little bit empty, with the only things that surround it are the enemies. Now, as for the combat itself, it's a really fun system, and while I would say it's a bit disappointing that they decided to scrap away Fairy Tail 1's turn-based system, as I think they could find various ways to improve it, but having said that, I do think that this new combat is actually really fun, and I would probably prefer it over the original one, as it's close to what an ideal Fairy Tail RPG would have. Though I still know that many people would prefer to have it having full-on action combat, or even say a Warriors Muso game. But even still, it's a lot more fun here, and even both the bosses and layer fights do feel a little more challenging here. However, it still has some issues, one which is chasing enemies to knock them down, as they tend to run away when they're weaker. It's a lot more janky of trying to track and hit some of them, as it's nothing akin to say the likes of Trails for Daybreak or even Metaphor with Fantasio. Another issue is that trying to select a target during battle is way too finicky for my liking. And another gameplay issue is that oftentimes your rank will decrease as often when you end fights. So it does get a little bit repetitive of having to build your fairy rank all over again. And lastly, it's a major one that I'm sure many people are very disappointed, and that the cast of playable characters, especially from the last one, have been cut severely down to just 8. And most of them are just relegated to support characters that assist you during battle. Or even worse, magic cards. Or, especially worse, being locked by DLC, especially in the cases of Jalal, which certainly is a decision, and a fate worse than being manipulated. And honestly, it's a real damn shame that they went this route. Now as for the music, it's great as it was in the first game, which is literal, as they will reuse previous tracks from the first game as well. But as for the new songs, they're great and fit with the general tone of Fairy Tail, and do a good job of emulating Fairy Tail's great score in the anime. So, as always, let's listen to some bangers. Now we get on to the content, as Fairy Tail 2 will have a lot right out of the game. That this game also has side quests, and they are whatever, though thankfully they're not required to progress for the main story. And the second one is the Plues, where they're scattered around across the world, and you can find Plue, and when you find him, they'll provide you stamps on his card that will give you rewards. And there are also the Fairy Tail Diaries, which are these fun interactions between the cast, and essentially they're nice skits in general, and also the key to help you unlock a very, very big post-game. And speaking of, after you beat the main story, you also get an epilogue, which is an original story that comprises of side stories, interactions, and a super boss at the end. There are of course already also DLC at the time of this video, which includes things like playable characters like Jalal, which I'm a bit salty on, Mavis and Zeref, as well as a battle arena and character sub-quests and moments. Completing the main story will take you around 20 hours or less, especially if you do everything or not. Now with that said, how is this game? Well, in many ways, this game is a bit of an improvement over the first game. But really, that's not saying much. And it's really not that much even. The narrative is more streamlined, and the combat is a lot more engaging, and the visuals are a bit of an upgrade. But however, this game, while for its many ups, it still takes some step backs, with things like the reduced character roster, and it clearly shows that this is still a budget title just like the first game. And overall makes for this not being what I call the perfect way to do a Fairy Tail game, especially on this scale. But then again, given the standard of anime games as a whole, you could do a lot worse. And I mean a lot worse. And sadly, I wouldn't still call this an ideal jumping point, especially for newcomers, even if they do have strong dialogues that will cap all the previous arcs towards it. Just like with the first game, this is still a game clearly for Fairy Tail fans, though for those who may still enjoy Fairy Tail 1, you'll be fine with Fairy Tail 2, honestly. But if you didn't, I don't think this will be hardly a marked improvement. Overall, Fairy Tail 2, much like with Fairy Tail, gets an average 3 plues out of 5. And overall, both Fairy Tail 1 and Fairy Tail 2 are basically the equivalent of fast food, which is not anything too crazy, but it's still mildly delicious at some points. Anyway, that'll be it for me. Special thanks again for Koei Tecmo for providing me a review code for Fairy Tail 2. And once again, special thanks to Spectre799 for collabing for me in this double review. By all means, check out his YouTube channel, he makes some really great content. And let me know down in the comments if you guys enjoyed this video and as well played any of these games. And I also have another Fairy Tail video right now you can watch as well. So, until then, special thanks to my patrons, and Mad Kaiser, out.